Today we're going to learn the final way that I know how to solve quadratic equations. It's called the quadratic formula. Now, factoring to me is my favorite because it's usually the fastest. We also had the square root way, which that only works if you have like no regular x's. Yesterday we did completing the square, which can work for everything. The nice thing about the quadratic formula is it can work for everything as well. So even if you can't factor it, you can always do the quadratic formula on everything. The only downfall is it's a little more complicated. It's just making sure you put the right numbers in the right spot. But, you know, it's all right. So here's the equation. It's x equals the opposite of b, or some people say negative b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that is over 2a. Let's look at a problem and let's figure out what a, b, and c are here. So it does have to equal 0 when you use the quadratic formula. So like this 5x can't be there, so we're going to have to move the 5x to the other side. So you would subtract it. We'd have x squared minus 5x plus 6 equals 0. So let's figure out our a, b, and c. A is always in front of the x squared. In this case, that's 1. There's an invisible 1. B is the number in front of the x's, the standard x's. So that would be negative 5 for us. And then c is the constant. It's the only number without an x attached to it. Great. So now we're going to use this formula. When I'm legitimately doing this, I set up like a skeleton version of it with parentheses. I'm thinking like opposite of something plus or minus square root of something squared minus 4 something something over 2 something. Now look, the 4 and the 2 are built into the equation. Those are there every time. But the first two blanks are b and b. So I know that b is negative 5, which means I'm going to have a negative 5 there and a negative 5 there. After the 4 and 2 are a's. So our a is positive 1. So I'll go ahead and put 1, 1. And then the c, the only spot where you have the c is after the 4a, and c is 6. Making sure things are in the right location is the toughest part, because it's just like attention to detail. Now we're just going to go across the numerator and do some pretty easy operations. So if you look here, it's negative negative 5, or opposite of negative 5. That's positive 5. We have this plus or minus. We'll deal with that later. Square root, negative 5 squared is 25. Minus 4 times 1 times 6. 4 times 1 is 4, times 6 is 24. The denominator, 2 times 1 is 2. Already that looks a lot nicer, a lot easier. We're going to still work in the square root, because we could do 25 minus 24. That's just 1. So 5 plus or minus the square root of 1 over 2. And then we take the square root of 1, and that's 1. 5 plus or minus 1 over 2. Now why the plus or minus? Because remember, square root of 1 could be positive 1. It could also be negative 1. So that plus or minus handles both of those. Once you get here, we're going to set up two equations. We're going to set up the 5 plus 1 over 2 and the 5 minus 1 over 2. Now again, those aren't terribly complicated to solve. 5 plus 1 is 6, divided by 2 is 3. 5 minus 1 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. 3 and 2 are your answers. They both work in the original equation. That was some pretty complicated work. Check this out though. If you look at the original problem and you were great at factoring, you might be like, all right, factors of 6 that add up to 5 would be 3 and 2. They'd have to both be minus x minus 3 times x minus 2. And then you could do that zero product property where we set up x minus 3 equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. Add the 3, x equals 3. Add the 2, x equals 2. Now to me, That's simpler than the quadratic formula. But again, not everything will be factorable. So some problems you can't factor, so you'd have to do completing the square or the quadratic formula. That's why we're practicing the quadratic formula. Gives you another option. All right, here we go. So I'm going to set up my skeleton here. Just some blanks in the formula where we have variables that we're substituting in for. So the first two blanks in the quadratic formula are b's. And in this case, b is -2. Then we have an a after the 4 and the 2. And our a in this problem is 1 again. And then the c is back here after the 4a. In this equation, c is -8. Sorry about the coughs. It's driving me nuts too, don't worry. All right, and then we just start in the numerator and just start working it. Opposite of -2 is +2, plus or minus square root. -2 squared. Don't forget, when you square anything, it comes out positive, because it's either a positive times positive or a negative times negative. So -2 squared is +4. But here's the weird part. This -4 times 1 is -4. -4 times -8 will switch to plus 32. Ooh! So be careful there. If your a or your c is negative, it's going to switch that sign to plus. And then denominator, we have 2 times 1, which is 2. We're still working in that square root. 2 plus or minus 4 plus 32 is 36 over 2. Now, what is the square root of 36? It's 6, right? So here's where we're just going to go ahead and set up our two equations. 2 plus 6 over 2 and 2 minus 6 over 2. And again, that comes from the plus minus right there. So 2 plus 6 is 8. Divided by 2 is 4. 2 minus 6 is -4. Divided by 2 is -2. Which again, this problem from the get-go was factorable, but not everything will be. All right, and b, there's an issue here. It has to equal 0, so we're going to have to move this 117 to the other side. So that'd be x squared minus 4x minus 117 equals 0. And now we can drop stuff into our equation here. I'm going to erase this so I got some space. Need some space, man. All right. B. B is -4. -4. -4. Then it's A. A in this problem is 1. Boop, boop. And then C is -117. Wow, it's going to be some big numbers. Opposite of -4 is +4. Plus or minus, -4 squared is 16. Now here I see a negative times negative, so I know that's going to switch it to plus. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 117 will be 4, 17, 34, 68. 2 times 1 is 2. That's where we're at. All right, we're going to do the square root still. 4 plus or minus square root of 468 plus 16 is 484 over 2. I think the square root of 484 is 20. No, it's probably not. I was thinking 24. 22. All right. So we'll do 4 plus 22 over 2 and 4 minus 22 over 2. 4 plus 22 is 26. Divided by 2 is 13. 4 minus 22 is negative 18, divided by 2 is negative 9. Whew. That was a doozy, man.